All right. Hey, everybody. This is Matt Maruka, and this is another episode of the Light Diet Podcast brought to you by Raw Optics. And this time we have a guest. So, as you know, if you follow us, usually I'm doing my solo quantum field report, solo cast episodes. And I was just telling Brian, it's rare that I find someone I really want to take the time and interview because there's not a ton of people really spitting fire, let's say, about light and energy and the things that the light diet is really focused on. And that's my goal is to the goal of the podcast and the light diet in general is to spread light in the world and bring more light to the world and help everyone, all of us realize that we are the light of the world and it's our job to shine. And so Brian's one of the people I've known for now about a year since meeting in person in Mexico, actually, just by pure chance. It was pretty serendipitous. He said, he was traveling with Brian Hoyer, another good friend of ours. And basically, they just had thought of me and sent me a text. And then they happened to be going to exactly where I was the next day, which was in Tulum, Mexico. So we hit it off, had a great time, chatted about all kinds of cool ideas. And I hadn't really learned a lot about Sauna Space, although I had heard of it. And Brian did the unthinkable. He gifted me his personal photon, which to this day I love and use and appreciate massively. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, yeah, there we go. There's the photon. So Brian started an amazing company called Sauna Space, and I'll let him tell you all about it. But the products they make are really exceptional. And for me, one of the best demonstrations of how you can use light to feel better, and you feel it really quickly. So without further ado, the Light Diet audience, this is Brian Richards.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks
so
for
glad to
coming
be
on.
here, man. Yeah, I don't think it was coincidence that we met. It was funny how we were thinking about you, and we ran into you shortly after thinking about you. In fact,
that was
and not in the United States, as it were. It was in a foreign country. But the weather was really nice down there. The light diet, the light scenario down there is amazing too. We're, like you said, we're totally beings of light. I like to say that we're taught in school that to emphasize the biochemical nature inside. We have these things called ATP, and we have these organelles, and everything is cogs and pulleys and levers. It's a mechanical system, is how it's described. But clearly, we're so much more than that. If you study advanced biology, if you study physics and quantum physics, you learn that there's a frequency basis for everything. This when you get down into the micro of the body and the micro of our beings. And so really we're much more photoelectric, than we are biochemical. We're quantum mechanical in nature. We're beings of light, and everything is driven by light and frequency and wavelength, at the fundamental level, and actually at the macro level too. And so we're like little plants, except we don't do photosynthesis. We do this thing called photobiomodulation. It's also a many syllable word. It's very long and complicated, but it's essentially we absorb light and we use it for energy and healing and power and connection. And it's how we connect to the world around us. So there's this thing called EMFs, electromagnetic fields or electromagnetism. And the sun does that. The sun emits a broad electromagnetic spectrum, and the sun, don't forget, it's up there. If you look up, if you get out of your phone, and you look up and it's not a cloudy day, you'll see that, hey, this great incandescent light source in the sky nurtures all life on Earth. We wouldn't be here without that sun. And so we're humans, we're egotistical. We get kind of stuck in our ways. We get into the zone, put our head down, sort of start charging, and we forget that there's this world around us that again is very much more light based than anything else. And so I didn't know anything about this, Matt. When I started, I founded SaunaSpace just because I had some health problems, had some adrenal fatigue type stuff. I think it's some things, some symptoms that many people would identify with. I was lethargic and low energy. I was kind of irascible, kind of bitchy, just like irritable.
No way.
Yeah, I know. No, really, man. It just kind of like Oh,
Just for the record, Brian is one of the most positive people I've ever met in my whole life. So I didn't even know this. Anyway.
well, that's the beginning. And then I had some visible things too. I had some weird acne on my torso only. It was kind of clustered around my kidneys. So I had body acne and not on my face. So if you met me, you'd be like, dude, what's your problem? Buck up. What are all these things you're complaining about? Because I looked okay, but I had this hidden toxicity that was leading to and then the other thing I had was some more neuropsychiatric symptoms. I had brain fog and I had some mind racing, insomnia. So these are my self-diagnosed adrenal fatigue symptoms that, I was like, oh, I'm just worn out, too stressed out, and dealing with some toxicity issues. So when I got told, or when I was recommended by a dermatologist to take Accutane, I was like, whoa, I'm not doing that. That's a very toxic drug. It's now been taken off the market. And so that was kind of the moment where I was like, I'm going to figure this out on my own. I'm going to go online like everybody else now. I'm not happy with the answers I'm getting from the conventional, the conventional sources. And I started doing research online, and I just kept coming back to this concept of sauna and of detoxification, of purification, that the body is a temple and you can purify it, and that can lead to better well-being, better health. And so at the end of my study online, I came across this concept of the electric incandescent light bath, and it was actually this thing invented by Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. So he's the Kellogg's cornflakes guy. He had had a sanitarium actually. So that was a word for a spa, health spa in like 1905 in Battle Creek, Michigan. But anyway, so the incandescent light bulb, which we use that word incandescent because we'll talk about that maybe in a minute. There's a physics phenomenon, but that's the same way the sun produces light. I just tell you right now, it's like you heat up a material really hot in nature, and it begins to emit light naturally in this very predictable way that we can integrate a physics law called Planck's law and predict the emission of an incandescent light source based on the temperature it's burning at. And so the sun, you do that with the sun, you measure all the wavelengths of the sun, and you get a power curve, an emission spectrum that perfectly matches what's predicted. So that's what incandescence is. Just like if you heated up an iron rod really hot, it glows red, right? So that's incandescence. The candle, the fireplace, and also the incandescent light bulb, because it has this little tungsten metal filament inside that is burning really hot and producing light, just like the sun does. So anyway, incandescent light bulbs is its own fascinating tour de force of so many smart and way smarter people than me it was amazing. It was kind of like the invention of the pencil. It was such a collaboration of minds, such a mind share that led to its eventual form that we see it today. In any case, it was in its form that we more or less use it today. It was invented and came to the world, or came to market in like 1889 or 1887. And so only a few years later, Dr. Kellogg sees these light bulbs, these incandescent light bulbs, and he goes, there's something about this light. Let's make a sauna out of it. I don't know what's going on, but there's something special. And this is before we knew about the mitochondrial responses, this photobiomodulation stuff. He just knew there was something special about it. And he built this Victorian style cabinet with like 200 light bulbs in it, in this huge array. And you'd stand in it. And he had these at his sanitarium. And he conducted sauna studies on over 50,000 invalids, so people with chronic illness, over 200,000 sauna sessions in his electric incandescent light baths. He also made these arc light baths. So arc light it's kind of like incandescent light, but it's much harder. It has a lot of UV and blue light that comes out. Anyway, so he did all this, and it was in 1905, and he wrote a book about it, Matt, called Light Therapeutics. And he published it in 1910.
I actually haven't read that one. I have to say I have not read that book yet, and I am very much excited.
So
to add it to my list.
Anybody you can go ahead and search it online. It's out of print, of course. There's a digital copy online you can read, and you can see all the photos, all his drawings, and actual photography of his Victorian baths and all these things. Anyway, so how fascinating is that?
It's amazing.
This reminds me of like Arthur Dinshaw, this Indian doctor who knew so much about did so much innovative research into light therapy. And we're not talking the last 20 years. We're talking 100 years ago that this was going. Over 100 years ago, all these guys were experimenting using light as a therapeutic modality, basically, and having really successful results. And Dr. Kellogg in particular, I was really excited about because he was using the light to create a sauna effect. And he didn't know at the time that it was also doing this whole other therapy we call now light therapy, red light therapy, infrared light therapy. Now we refer to that. So I found this, I made my own modern version, very bricolage, very like garage concept, electric incandescent light bath. And I used this probably 2 times before bed, and my insomnia went away. It was essentially cured. And that really motivated me to use it a lot. So I used it a lot for 6 months, like 4 or 5 days a week, probably 40 minute sessions at least. And after 4, 5, or 6 months, I was mildly shocked at how all of my symptoms were gone. All those symptoms I described. I was sleeping well. My skin looked great. All of those sort of nebulous qualitative symptoms I had, like brain fog, inability to concentrate well, moodiness, outlook, patience, and these things that they're hard to quantify, but when you feel good, when you're in the flow state, and I had just had lots of energy, unlimited amounts of energy. And I'd wake up like ready to attack the day, just assault it with, and lots more patience, even with my mother and my people with whom I was struggled to develop those qualities.
I understand.
So,
Yeah. I work with my mother actually to a certain degree. She helps out with my business, and she's amazing. So it's in a way a family business, but I understand that requires tremendous overcoming and energy.
Yeah, you develop those habits with people, those buttons, and you push each other's buttons. It's just what we do as humans. We develop these habits, just like someone punches, gives you a swing 5 times, and eventually on the 6th time you react like this. So, but you can overcome those things. You can use your third eye, your medial prefrontal cortex, your watchtower in your brain, and you can train your mind to correct and change those mental, like, reactive habits that you have, whether it's psyching yourself out, or you're working with your mother, so many things.
Right.
But anyway, so, and I had no idea about any of that at that point, but I felt good, I felt better. So that was the inspiration to form what eventually became Sauna Space. And it's kind of a long story, but I made some for some friends and family, and got some endorsements, and eventually got a business loan, and got several other loans after that. And that was like 8 years ago. And so now you can see kind of in the factory now, trying to pump out these photons and these saunas. And the photon was not something that I originally had. It was originally just the sauna. But today, now it kind of, it embodies what I really thought the most awesome, coolest sauna would be. And that's something that's more portable. Everybody can use it. And it has this light therapy stuff going on. It's got EMF blocking technology in it now, in the product itself, and also in the whole sauna. We have a Faraday version for those who are interested in that. And yeah, it's all about kind of like bringing together ancestral wisdom with modern technology. Our ancestors understood light, getting sunlight every day, and really doing passive sweating, heating up the body for purification purposes. This is ancient wisdom that we now see buttressed by modern research. I'm sure you know about this, Matt, and you've spoken surely a lot about it. There's like 7,000 photobiomodulation studies in the literature. It's unimaginable how many there are. And with sauna as well, there are thousands of studies looking into sauna, and in both categories, in the heat therapy and the light therapy. Pretty much everything that's investigated seems to get better, with the use of these things. to one degree or another. And so it's like, well, we don't have much time in our lives. We're so busy in the modern world. Why not do both those things together? And it turns
Amen.
out there's a synergy between the two of them, and they're an interesting interplay where both of these things are basically harnessing the body's intelligent healing systems. And we have it all kind of built in and baked in if we give the body, what it needs. So we talk about the science and it being really complicated, the photobiomodulation and how photons of light and frequencies of certain light bands are converted into metabolic processes in the body. So there's like photochemical reactions and all this in the weeds talk. We could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, but I like to zoom out to the macro and remind everybody, yes, the science is quite complicated, and the math and all that, but the solutions are simple. The solutions are, ancestral, what you call the light diet, this ancestral relationship with the
That's
sun,
what I was going to
with
say.
light.
Yeah.
It's this light diet. So it's light diet. It's real, real food. Food is medicine. More of a natural food approach. Understanding that we can just heat the body up passively and purify it. And we also get cognitive benefits and we get longevity benefits and basically reduction in what's called all-cause mortality. So doing sauna frequently reduces your risk of dying of all things. And then with the light therapy stuff, there's just so much other things going on. That's also, and all to say that it just re-optimizes you from the electrons up to the organs, to the whole body, and you get better. And when you get better, you feel better, you're thriving instead of just kind of surviving, which a lot of people are. There's so many people out there who are, taking multiple prescription drugs and stressed out all the time, chronically tired, not getting good sleep, and it's stuck in a rut, stuck in a rut. And these solutions are so simple. So those are two of them. Other ones are like, our ancestors didn't have constant access to food. It's kind of and so they call that, in the biohacker world, they call it intermittent fasting. They've got this funny name for it, but we weren't able to like constantly eat food all the time. And so our bodies do this thing called autophagy, and it's a form of cleansing and turnover in the body when we don't give our body food like every hour of the day. And so there's interesting, simple ways. Again, something that's really simple, just narrowing the window in which you eat and not eating too late. And then with the light diet, not just having the good light in the day and the right times of the day, in the morning, in the afternoon, ideally when the ratio of the sun's emission of near infrared, red to blue ultraviolet is higher, but also after dark, like avoiding the junk blue light that we have everywhere now, the screens, TV, all that stuff. It's simple solutions to even though the underpinning science is quite complicated.
This is amazing, brother. I fully agree with everything you're sharing. And it's like music to my ears. There are very few people, as I mentioned before, who I can get on on a call with and just rap. And it feels like we're literally mutually understood, speaking the same language regardless. I want to comment on a few things you said even earlier on about so everything being energy, and you mentioned we don't technically do photosynthesis. It's interesting, of course, that is the mainstream narrative to a degree, that we don't photosynthesize, but there are some really interesting books and researchers sort of claiming that we do. There's a great book that Ben Greenfield recommended called Melanin, the Master Molecule, I believe. And I think he has another book or a paper called Human Photosynthesis.
Is it melanin or is it melatonin?
No, melanin.
Okay, the pigment. Okay, go ahead.
The pigment, exactly. And that this basically uses, light energy to split water and do all sorts of really amazing things in the cells. And that he's sort of getting, claiming that this is a form of human photosynthesis. And so it's, vitamin D, of course, again, the mainstream narrative doesn't really think of us as photosynthesizing, but if you think about it, it's like we take a raw matter, some kind of raw material, and we're using light energy to convert it into something that is active in the body. Like, if that's not photosynthesis, I don't know what is. I mean, okay, in the case of photosynthesis, they argue you're creating something new from, so in actual plant photosynthesis, they're generating sugars, so carbon, hydrogen, so C6H12O6 is a basic glucose molecule that they're making from carbon dioxide from the air that the plants absorb, and then they're mixing it with water to get the hydrogens, and they're splitting the water with the sunlight energy, and then latching those hydrogens onto a carbon and oxygen chain, making a sugar. And then they make, they can make starch or cellulose depending on how tightly wound it is. But I mean, that's like plant photosynthesis. It's like, well, we're doing basically the same thing. We have a lot of matter in our body, and when we get light energy, for example, again, ultraviolet light, we're using basically to synthesize vitamin D. So it's light synthesis, photosynthesis. So it's really cool that, the research is showing more and more that we are light-based beings. I love what you were saying as well about how we are all light energy. Someone I've been studying a ton from recently, I did tell you, because we met right after I was at one of his events, is Dr. Joe Dispenza. And, one might argue that because I was at this Joe Dispenza event, sort of like manifesting energy, let's say, in the quantum field, maybe that's why our timing just was perfect right after. I mean, you guys, you guys are doing your work too, you and Brian. So, and he talks a ton in a really scientific, but also bringing in a spiritual perspective of how we are beings of energy. Like, for example, when you look at, there's a great study he mentions, and I'm not sure of the exact name, people could probably find it online, but women who had uterine cancer, and they all shared the same pattern in their field. He was measuring their body's field, and the women with this cancer had this pattern. The interesting thing was there were several women who had this pattern in their body's field, their energy field. Again, I'm not exactly sure what he used to measure this, but some kind of advanced equipment, of course. And the women who had this pattern in their field who didn't have this cancer, he was wondering, like, well, how is this? And then eventually all the women who had the pattern in their field developed this specific uterine cancer. So it's like the field of energy that is sort of who we are is preceding the formation of matter, or organizing the formation of matter. And I imagine you've read or you're familiar with Robert O. Becker and The Body Electric, where he breaks down the science of bone regeneration, and he shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that we are beings of energy. Bone regeneration is through semiconduction. Our nerves transmit energy basically through electricity, of course. But he discovered all these sorts of energy fields that were previously undiscovered and undocumented
and
in
even
the scientific literature.
We emit light. So you talk about energy fields, and I think some people hear that and they're like, oh yeah, woo woo.
Yeah, right.
But you can actually measure the emission of light from a human. This Japanese researcher invented this really high-tech camera that can measure individual light photons, and you can basically record using this camera a person standing there, and you can see their what is referred to as an aura. It's an emission of light from the body, and like you're referring to, that's the energy field. That's this thing that people who are discerning individuals can read that and make interpretations into your well-being, your future, your state of health, like what you were just referring to about the uterine cancer cases. So this is not woo-woo. You can actually measure it.
Amen. Yeah, we can. And that, could you share the name of that camera?
I don't even have that on me. It's
no worries. I'm just curious.
But it's a camera that can basically measure individual photons. And so what they find now, when you basically record people's photonic emission, so their light emission, the aura, the more incoherent the aura is. Incoherent light is light that goes like in all different directions, and it seems to have no logic to it. So the more incoherent the light, the less healthy a person is, the more toxic Absolutely. They are, and the more coherent, not necessarily polarized, but the more like organized the light is, the emission of light is, the more centered and healthy a person is. It's pretty fascinating
it's
stuff.
fascinating. This would be a case in my mind as well for meditation from the perspective of someone like Joe Dispenza, but that's a separate discussion. So I want to continue down this track of incandescent light, photobiomodulation, red light therapy, all the things that you came to that you said. And again, I just want to say your sort of introduction that you've given for me is like you could mic drop right there, but I'm not going to let you off that easy. I want to keep going, charging deeper. So the discussion about incandescent light is really, really fascinating to me, especially in the context of how incandescent light has been vilified today in the mainstream. And I understand that there's a mistake that was made by the mainstream perspective, which is they believe that the only light that matters is the light we can see. And they said, well, all this heat energy, this infrared light is just wasted energy. And so we should cut it all out and make these non-thermal light sources like LEDs, saving a ton of energy per bulb and cumulatively a lot of energy over the whole, but that's actually not natural. We don't typically have anywhere in nature, except maybe the moon and the stars, lights, and the moon isn't even an emission source, of course, of light, but light sources that are non-thermal. We have fire and the sun, or the sun and fire, they're thermal light sources. Anytime in nature, as I understood, we had light, we had heat. There was always that near infrared. So I'd love to hear your perspectives on, you're just kind of background, about the banning of the incandescent bulb, like what's going on there, why it's demonized. And then like, let's flip the script and talk about why incandescent lighting is absolute fire. Like, no pun intended, especially compared to LED lights.
Yeah. So definitely the first man-made electrically powered light source was the incandescent bulb, and that was all that was available for 60 years or something, or even longer than that. They eventually, we eventually came out with fluorescent light bulbs, and then eventually came out with LED light bulbs, light emitting diodes. But yeah, in the beginning it was fascinating because before, if you wanted to eat, or if you wanted light after dark indoors, you only had fireplaces. And it totally changed Western culture when the electrically powered artificial light source, the incandescent light bulb, was invented. It actually radically changed us, and not for the better, actually, in many ways. And you can read about that, some of that stuff in The Body Electric. Before, when everybody had fireplaces at home, you'd cook your food in the fireplace and you take the ashes and you put it in your little garden, and it would be a source of micromineral replenishment. And you had a very nutritive diet, and everybody had their own little personal gardens. When we went to electric based light indoors, a couple of things happened. One thing was we could work a lot later, right? So you could run the factories all day and all night long. And so the work hours got longer because now you can just light up the indoor space in the factory and you can just keep working forever. And furthermore, and maybe you've talked about this, that blue light is a sympathetic stressor. It gets you jacked up. It keeps you awake. And so we know that, as far as like watching TV late and looking at your iPhone late with a lot of blue light messes with your circadian rhythm. It's tricking your mind into thinking that the sun's still up. And we're programmed such that if we get blue light stimulus, we try to stay awake. And so it's no coincidence that when you're watching a TV programming and it cuts to a commercial, all the colors are brighter. And when you go indoor into a casino, it's tons of blue light, all high energy visible light. And when you go into a retail shopping establishment, the malls or stuff, it's all lit up as bright as possible. They actually understand this in the consumer retail world. You can use high energy visible light, blue light, to get people excited, all for the sake of selling them things, basically getting them to buy things. There's a whole science behind this, man, and how they do signage and how you sell products. And the product consumer industry understands that blue light gets people to buy stuff. And that's sort of some of the biological basis behind it.
So I want to throw in on that note, just hold the thought here. This really struck me one time when I thought, like, if you were an alien and you came to Earth and you saw everyone looking at one of these things, an iPhone or any kind of phone or computer for that matter, like what would you, if you had a basic knowledge of what we were, but you didn't know what the devices were, what would you think? Presumably it became clear to me, we'd think, well, everyone's just getting this light, and it's almost like a light therapy device, but in a negative sense, so to speak. Like, I'm looking at this thing and it's just light frequencies stimulating different, parts of my brain. Of course, we think, oh, I'm doing this application and I'm sending emails, but what is it at a basic physical level? It's just text, light, games people are playing that's stimulating different parts of their brain. And to your point about it just being like a drug, it's really just like a blue light drug, a phone.
It is. Really, it's hypnotic.
When you take out the blue light with the, the color filter setting, if you use the red on your phone at night, it's like, it's not as interesting to look at. It's not as like, it's not as stimulative. Anyway.
No, absolutely, man. Absolutely. It's and so this is well understood. And this was understood even back then. Holy cow, we can use these electric incandescent powered light bulbs, and we can have longer work hours, longer shifts at the factories, and we can work indoors, just generally speaking, and various other sort of ancillary effects on our modern daily lifestyle, the introduction of electricity in general, and particularly the ability to have visible light whenever we want it in any indoor or outdoor space, because we have electrical power and we have light bulbs. It totally changed us, but nonetheless, it was still a great light source, because at the very least it produced light just like the sun, and that production of light is called incandescence. And incandescence produces a broad spectrum emission that's basically a big bell curve of light. That's the peak of the curve is centered in the visible light spectrum, and then there's this long tail into infrared. And if you break down the portions of light and the percentages from the sun, over 40% of sunlight is near infrared. And if you add in red light, that's like, I don't know, 10 or 12% or something, over 50%. The majority of the sun's emission is stimulating stimulating healing and energetic and other awesome responses in the cells. There's photobiomodulation literally means light controlling biology. So the majority of the sun's emission, Matt, is something that our cells respond to, like in a positive way. And yes, there is a
sun comes out at that moment.
It's like, dude, and so we need that. And it turns out that the majority of the sun's emission and the component that heals us from a mitochondrial perspective and sustains us and regenerates us, activates mitochondrial melatonin, which we have to talk about in a little bit. But so many other things that are going on are in this chunk of light basically called infrared. And we're going to throw red light in there too, because it's right next to infrared. But that is present in all incandescent light sources. It's what you also refer to as thermal light. So different names of it, but basically it's an incandescent light source. The only way to produce light this way is via incandescence. And so the incandescent light bulb had that. The fireplace has that. The bonfire has that. So when you sit in front of that bonfire, it's not just the warmth that makes you feel good. There's literally a light stimulation at their cellular level in the brain cells that triggers dopamine and serotonin release in all the cells of the body. It's just like, it just makes you feel good. And when your cells feel good, you consciously as a being, feel good. So we had this. And so even indoors, we had the blue light, yes, from the light bulb, which is more high energy visible light. It's causes free radical formation. It's more damaging. But we had at the same time, just like the sun, the incandescent, the near infrared and the infrared that were regenerating and healing us simultaneously. And so indoors, we had this light for a very long time. But, as the artificial light technology advanced, the sort of the scientists and the technologists and the inventors in the industry are not thinking about the health benefits at all. They're thinking about the efficiency of the electrical utilization. Mm-hmm. So you have fluorescent light bulbs that come out, and those were terrible by the way in the beginning, because they had fluorescent light bulbs use what are they called, ballast in them that basically it basically pumps electricity through a gas filled tube that has mercury vapor in it. and the mercury vapor and the different compounds inside with the mercury fluoresce, and they produce light through fluorescence. That's why it's called fluorescent light bulb. And the ballast in those ran at like 1 to 200 hertz, and those are lower frequencies. So hertz is 1/2. So those low frequencies are actually could be interpreted by the eye. And so when they first came out with fluorescent light bulbs, it gave people headaches and people were really irritated by it. Plus, the CRI, the color rendering index of fluorescent bulbs, is terrible. It's like sodium halide bulbs. It's big, huge old bulbs. They're like this big, and they have sodium gas on the inside. So color rendering index is a measurement of how well the light source allows you to distinguish differences in color and hues. So if you have a low CRI, everything looks like brown. If you have 100% CRI, then the color you see in nature, the red color, is in fact that, and it's not being distorted by this low quality light source that's lighting up whatever you're looking at. So all that to say that they were terrible CRI. And guess what the CRI of incandescent light is? Well, it's 1, because it's perfect, because all the standards are based on incandescent. So the color rendering index, the calibration is incandescent light from the sun. So you can buy like LEDs now, and you look, when you buy an LED, it has a CRI rating, and it's usually like 0.8. It's from 0 to 1, so 1 being perfect. And most LEDs you buy for homes are like 80, 85, 0.8, 0.85. Really expensive high dollar ones for photography applications are like 0.95, 0.92, but none of them are 1. Only incandescent light does that. So anyway, so they're like, oh, the fluorescent bulbs, ow, this is giving us headaches. This is terrible. This is awful. So they increase the frequencies of the ballast. And now the modern fluorescent ballasts run at like 600 to 1,000, even greater hertz. So they're much higher frequencies. And it turns out that when you have this, because when you have flickering light, pulsing light, which we didn't have in nature either, it turns out it's bad for our biology. It damages us. So, and there's a fair amount of study in the literature that shows that pulsing light, generally speaking, is associated, or I should say it's associated with migraines, depression, insomnia, and other things. It's just like a strobe light, when you stand in front of a strobe light, it's like irritating. So the fluorescent bulbs do that because they're all running on alternating current, and the LEDs do that too. But it turns out when you increase the frequency high enough, it's less irritating to us, because our bodies and our blue light receptors, which are everywhere in our bodies, in our skin and everywhere, they can't interpret the pulsed signal as well, the pulsed light stimulus. So anyway, like, okay, those are great, but mercury vapor, and they're not as efficient as this new technology that came out called LED, light emitting diode. So light emitting diode is basically a computer chip that you run electricity through, and it causes fluorescing compounds in the computer chip to fluoresce. So it's a diode that emits light emitting diode, LED. And these are better than fluorescent bulbs, number one, because there's no mercury vapor. So it's not toxic to humans, not toxic to the environment.
On the mercury vapor note, I just want to say a great light researcher, Alexander Wunsch, who I'm sure you're familiar with, made a great point to me, which is that when you activate, so all molecules, all atoms have certain frequencies of light, wavelengths of light that they absorb and emit. It's their emission spectra, right? And so mercury in the bulb, when you activate it through the electricity in the fluorescent bulb, in the vapor, it's going to emit those specific frequencies, which mercury naturally absorbs and re-emits. And then interestingly, that is a direct resonance, obviously, with the mercury. If someone has mercury toxicity, the mercury in their cells, so that the wavelengths specifically that are emitted by the mercury vapor are going to activate mercury inside someone's cells if they're mercury toxic. So for anyone with mercury toxicity, it can cause huge, fluorescent bulbs can be horrible, because the wavelengths that those bulbs put off specifically activate the mercury in the cells, basically bringing it to life, making it move around and do stuff.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt refers to that as bioresonance.
Yeah,
It's this whole concept of like, you don't want to surround yourself with toxic materials because they resonate with any toxins you have in your body and cause those, to detox perhaps in ways that are can be stressful to the body instead of more thoughtful, methodical detox like what a sauna does. So yeah, you don't want to surround yourself with mercury. And so you talk about, well, who has mercury in their body, Matt? Everybody does. We're all exposed to mercury. It's something that we constantly, aluminum, mercury, or we have pretty much ubiquitous exposure to that due to just modern industry and modern consumer products and everything. So that's a problem for everybody. Yeah, it's it's not just that it does bioresonance in your body. It's the spectrum of light it emits. You can look up online spectrum of a fluorescent bulb. It's very digital looking, junk light looking. It's like this spiky spectrum that looks really bizarre. It's not the beautiful analog broad spectrum incandescent light. It's this weird spiky stuff. It looks even more weird than a LED light spectrum, as it were. So it's kind of like whatever, it's technology, but it did use less electricity to produce the same amount of lumens of foot candles as incandescent light. So from an electrical energy use perspective, a kilowatt hour perspective, it was desirable for the future, for progress. So then we get to LEDs, and it's even more energy efficient, uses less electricity to produce the same amount of lumens of foot candles. Plus, like you said, no mercury vapor. Plus, it's not a glass tube. It's not this thing that's delicate and breakable. The LED is more durable. It's it's something that you can it can take a hit. It can wall up, and it doesn't just break. Like a glass bulb would. So, what happened though in that is that when you make an artificially electrically powered light source more efficient, from an electrical perspective, what you're doing is you're removing the infrared. You're removing the emission of light that you can't see. You're removing the worthless part that they thought had no benefit at all because it wasn't producing any visible light. And LEDs, the spectrum of LEDs is very, very much focused on a household LED in the visible light spectrum, very much focused on blue. And so from a technological perspective, it was advantageous. More light. It's only visible light. We don't need this infrared. It's wasting. It's just energy that's wasted because we can't see anything with it. And unfortunately, that advancement of the technology was deleterious to our health because that component of light, as we've been discussing, the infrared component, has so many amazing healing benefits. And so it's bad enough that we started living indoors, right, with electrically powered light, instead of us living more, majority of our time being outdoors under the sun like you are now, Matt. Everybody is now like me, indoors all day long, artificially under artificial light. And the artificial light now doesn't even have that healing infrared, near infrared photobiomodulation, mitochondrial stimulation component at all. It's just all 100% visible light. And there's a couple of things that are worse about LEDs just for general lighting utilization, that LEDs are worse than fluorescent bulbs, as bad as fluorescent bulbs are. One thing is that LEDs run at 120 hertz on alternating current. So remember how I said low frequencies are more easily interpreted and felt by human light receptors in the body. So that's one thing. The other thing is, well, what happens when light pulses? When light pulses, it's basically you get an emission of light, and then you have a break, and then you have an emission of light, and that light comes in pulses and packets that are separated by a little bit of time. And how much they're separated by is the frequency of the pulsing light. So I said modern fluorescent bulbs are 600 to 1,000 hertz. LEDs are typically 120 hertz. That means they're turning on and off 120 times a second. And that is low enough and slow enough that our bodies can interpret it. And then another thing about the pulsing light is LEDs go from 100% of lumen emission to 0% of lumen emission with each pulse. So 120 times a second, they're going from 100% light emission to 0. So the pulse, the nature of the pulsing light is more dramatic. It's more severe. When a fluorescent bulb pulses at 600 or 1,000 hertz or greater, it's going from 100% light emission to like 30% light emission. So the pulse is less severe. So all that to say that the LED light bulb, the flickering aspect that people don't think about, this is a very toxic sidecar that comes with it that's in some ways worse than fluorescent bulbs. But then fluorescent bulbs are terrible because if you break it, you have to call basically a hazmat team to clean up your mercury vapor that's like splashed all over everything. So it's like they both have severe disadvantages. And good old incandescent bulbs, the much maligned light source now from the modern perspective, and according to the modern conventional narrative, it doesn't have any mercury vapor. It's actually still pretty energy efficient. It's not very inefficient, I don't think. And it doesn't have any toxicity issues. And it's not only is it not dangerous to us when it breaks, it's not dangerous to the environment. It's just glass and tungsten and argon gas inside of it. So it's not toxic at all. It's in fact quite beneficial for us. But in the drive for energy efficiency, our overlords who like to regulate us into oblivion have said, no, there shall be a standard for energy efficiency in artificial light technology, and it shall be at this level. And so they passed this law that practically, I think it was like 2000, about 5 years ago, Matt, or something like that, or more. And it slowly phased out high wattage incandescent bulbs.
Was this at the federal level or just
this is at the federal level? Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Federal
California,
level.
Hawaii, certain states have already fully banned the sale of.
They did that. Yeah, they did on their initiative, but there was a federal law that it didn't ban incandescent bulbs per se. It established a minimum efficiency standard for legal sale of. It's the same in artificial California. Light sources, but it's a ban by another name. It was still a ban.
Yeah, they call it an effectively banned rather than technically banned or something like that.
Right. And so that now if you go to the store, you can't really find 75 watt or greater bulbs. Where you used to be able to buy a 3-way incandescent light bulb that you went click, click, click on the lamp and it went 50, 100, 150 watts. And you could decide how bright it was. There are now, some LED replacements that are dimmable and tunable and stuff. But that basically it banned high wattage incandescent bulbs other than specialty use bulbs. So rough, work bulbs, therapeutic bulbs, these bulbs, which are, my bulb is called the Thermalite bulb. It's sort of it's specially developed heat lamp, purpose designed for human therapeutic use. But even without me, these bulbs are used by farmers to heat livestock and have been for 120 years. And so it's still very commonly used light source because, and we should get into that in a minute, but there is no more efficient way to heat biological tissue.
Let's get into it. Yeah, absolutely.
But really that's basically the story of incandescent light. Having said that, I would just want to put in a couple caveats there. The French OSHA, the French Occupational Hazard Government Body, it's called ANSIS. It's similar to the American OSHA. They put out a proclamation that was totally buried by the mainstream narrative. They put out a release in 2015, Matt, that said, do not use LED lights for general lighting purposes at the home and the office. It is so damaging to the eyes and so damaging to our health that LED lighting should only be used for industrial applications. And the reason for that is that even worse than fluorescent bulbs, LEDs, in terms of the spectrum, are a large, and I'm talking about general home LEDs, that we use for lighting. They have a huge blue light peak, and then they added a fluorescent compound or two to add a little bit of orange red color to make it look kind of like tungsten. But if you look at the percentage of the light emission, it's like 40 or 50% of it or more is blue light. And you can see that with the spectrometer, or you can look at that online at Light Spectra, and you can see that blue light component it's hidden. Our eyes think it's like a incandescent source because it looks yellow like tungsten because of the other fluorescent compounds. But what's hidden behind there is this sort of deadly blue light spike that's really attacking us. And I learned that from a presentation of Dr. Wunsch.
Yeah.
He had this presentation, and I think it was like the Ophthalmology Society. He did a really awesome talk that's on, I think, still on Vimeo, wherein he showed a slide that showed an acute retinal damage from someone who took LSD and looked into the sun, and it burned a hole in their retina. And then and right next to it, he had a slide of a human retina that was chronically exposed to general LED lighting. And it had like 10,000 little pinprick holes in it instead of one big hole. And he was demonstrating that slowly but surely this stuff is causing severe damage to the eyes. And it's because, again, we're just not programmed to get this type of light. And we don't have any of the healing component in it. So
super interesting. I want to
really
just
sad.
throw in a couple points. It's not ideal. And we'll talk about that more. It's far from ideal, but I just want to mention regarding the idea of the flicker and how we don't see visible flicker at lower or at higher wavelengths. It's supposedly, let's say, less damaging at beyond certain frequencies because our eyes can't perceive it. I had an interesting run-in with this. I was measuring because I was curious, and I was on the market for a new Apple computer. And so I was looking at and because I'm always on the road, I use a MacBook, a notebook, a laptop. I don't have like a desktop. And so I was looking at the new MacBook Pro 14 and 16 inches. I don't know if do you follow Apple? Do you know about Apple products?
Yeah.
So they
Go
released
ahead.
these two new MacBooks, like new design, different, tailored for creators. They have an SD card slot and like a HDMI cable, which Steve Jobs probably would have been really not happy about because he wanted everything to be like only one cable. But anyway, they went with what everyone is sort of asking for. Hey, I'm a photographer. I need more processing power. I need to be able to take the SD card and put it right in my computer. Why should I have to have an adapter? It doesn't make sense. So maybe he would have gone for it. Separate discussion. Anyway, so it's a really cool new sleek computer, bigger. And I was thinking, this is cool. Like, I want to get this new computer. It looks awesome. And then I'm measuring the screen. And I remember Dr. Wunsch had also said to me at one point that the light from a Mac screen is amazing, actually. Like, it's as good as it gets for an LED light source. Like, it's no flicker, like perfect as far as an LED light source could be. Now, it doesn't have obviously near infrared. It's not ideal as far as overall lighting goes, but nonetheless, really good for a computer screen. And I took this to heart. And so then I thought, you know what, I should measure these. And I actually found that the new MacBooks, they totally changed something from the previous, 10 years plus generations of MacBooks, where something with the new super OLED screen had like really high flicker, really high frequency. For example, for comparison, the current one I'm using, which I ended up getting instead of the new ones, it's like 100, I believe it's 120 Hertz and like 0% flicker. So although there's the Hertz, the flicker percentage, I'm actually not expert in these technical readings, maybe to the extent like Brian Hoyer is as a technician who's measuring people's houses and stuff. I'd like to definitely get more into the details, but nonetheless, I was like, okay, this looks good. As I understood, this is what Dr. Wunsch was referring to, that I can see the measurement, the 0% flicker or extremely low percent flicker at the 120 Hertz frequency. And then on the new one, it was like 14,000 Hertz, like really high, like 14,600 something. And it varied a little bit every time I measured, but it was more or less the same. And the flicker percentage was something like between 63 and 75% flicker. So I was thinking like, this is horrible. But then I actually had spoken with Dr. Wunsch and more recently and revealed this to him. And he was actually pretty surprised. And he said like, this never would have been allowed on Steve Jobs' watch, in his opinion, because he would have been much more attentive to details, but clearly no one at Apple is.
So yeah, for those of you, so you can out there listening to this, the technology behind that is called direct current drivers. So you can actually buy monitors, and I highly recommend this. The old Macs, and I actually still use an iMac, like a 2015 era iMac. They're using a technology that is out there that you can buy from nicer monitors. They're called certified low eye strain monitors. And they're basically using direct current drivers to modulate the alternating current that would normally cause flickering to try to give a steady flow of electricity to the LEDs. And when they do that, they, you can really significantly reduce the, it's not so much the frequency of the flicker that you change, but that percentage flicker that you refer to, the intensity of the flicker, the severity of the flicker, you can reduce that quite a bit. So if you're buying monitors out there, you definitely want to go for the certified low eye strain ones, because the flicker is not nearly as bad. It's not nearly as stressful to the body and to the eyes. But that's all. And I'm definitely not the expert in this, but I do know a little bit about it. The difference between regular LEDs and OLEDs is that the regular LEDs, it's like this whole array on your screen, right, of all these LEDs, thousands of LEDs, but they're all backlit by the same light. That's the regular LEDs. The newer technology, the OLED is each LED has its own individual backlight. It's its own light. And so I've actually measured that too. Some of the new iPhones and some of I've measured one of my team members is Samsung Note 10 Plus, and it has a 240 hertz OLED. It has an OLED screen and has a 240 hertz flicker, and the flicker on is astronomical. And you can buy a flicker meter on Amazon, or some online store where you're measuring the frequency and the degree of the pulse light, and the cheap ones put it to sound. So like the louder the sound, the worse it is. And some of those, many of the OLED screens I measure, including the new iPhones, have a really severe flicker, really high percentage of flicker. It's really intense. So I imagine that's what's going on with that new line of computer products.
Yeah, it appears so. I would say about the iPhone, one thing that Wunsch also mentioned to me is that the I guess in a way, a cool thing about OLEDs is when you have blackness on the screen, it's actually true blackness. In other words, there's nothing on behind it, which is, in a sense, like if I were to read on a Kindle, like on the Kindle app on my phone, which better to use like a physical Kindle because they are better because they don't have, it's e-ink, so it doesn't have a backlight. It just has a strip of LEDs around the outside that you can turn on and off. And that was another recommendation from Dr. Wunsch, is that the Amazon Kindle Oasis, the newer one, it's not only does it have it's e-ink, so it doesn't have a backlight. It's just moving like pixelated ink basically in the screen. But then it also has the strip of LEDs around the outside that light up that e-ink. Like, for example, if you have a Kindle and you don't have light, you can't see it in the dark because it doesn't have a backlight. You have to turn the light strip on. But it actually has the option to use warm light. So you can actually make it really super warm, which is actually, it's like he said, a great source of light. But so if I did read on my phone, which I do to a certain degree, because like sometimes I just want to go out with my phone and not my Kindle.
Yeah, but you're doing the same thing with your phone and using a night shift or a warm light filter.
I can use night shift, but I can also, but that won't take the flicker. But I could do, and I haven't done this a lot, but one thing I've heard is you could do the white on black. So if you're reading white text on a black background, again, I've heard Wunsch say as well that this could actually be better for the eyes, like white text on a black background. I thought that was really interesting. But the one reason I did bring up that
you basically have less light, so it's the dark mode thing. You have less blue light, less overall lumens.
Exactly. So the reason I brought up this dimming thing about the Mac, so to your point that after a certain frequency with the fluorescent lights, the visual stimulus becomes, or the non-visual effects of the flicker become theoretically less damaging above a certain frequency. Wunsch actually came back to me and actually had said that he said, maybe you wish with what I'm going to tell you, you would have gone for the newer computer. The reason being that after a certain frequency, and this is like 14,000, it's so high. He said it's so high that it more than likely has minimal effects on the biology, which I thought was really interesting. So it really speaks to your point, just in a different way of explaining the fluorescence. Now, I'm not saying fluorescent bulbs are good because the frequency is bad. They still flicker in a bad way. The color rendering is horrible. The spectrum is horrible. But it is interesting that they made that shift from what's in the perceptible range of flicker to somewhat outside of that. And it did reduce the effect. So I want to mention that. I want to also ask you about dimming. So you said, incandescence you can dim. Now, I was under the impression that when an incandescent bulb, or any bulb for that matter, is dimmed, it significantly increases the flicker. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, let's hit. I'll attack this directly. So you should be asking yourself, well, Brian, you've been talking about all these artificial light sources, they're all powered by alternating current, and you just said, hey, alternating current is the reason that you have pulsing light, because alternating current in the United States on a 60 hertz electrical supply means that the direction of the current changes, alternating current 120 times a second. And that was awesome for the conveyance of electricity over long distances. You use alternating current, and this is just in the weeds of the science, but you have less resistance, so you have less loss of energy. So you can take electricity, bring it from the electrical station a long way, send it to the homes with that very little energy loss, and you use alternating current at very high voltages to do that. But unfortunately, alternating current with the phase change that occurs, so it just changes direction 120 times a second, that causes, during that microsecond where the direction of the current changes, you get a power loss. And so in any light source, any typical light source that's powered by alternating current, you have the potential to have a pulse light effect, a flickering light effect. And you definitely have it with anything that's powered by alternating current. So what about incandescent bulbs? Incandescent bulbs, think about how incandescent bulbs work. Unlike LEDs, which are the computer chip that fluoresces, and the fluorescent bulb that you run electricity through the mercury vapor and that fluoresces, incandescent bulbs, you're taking that tungsten filament that's inside it and you're heating it to 2 or 3,000 Kelvin, so 2 or 3,000 degrees. The little tiny film metal tungsten wiry thing inside of the glass light bulb itself, and you're heating that metal up hot enough that it emits light via incandescence. So you've got this metal that's heated to 2,400 Kelvin, very hot, and then the electrical source then pulses, and you get a little bit of power loss for a second. So what happens is that tungsten filament cools down a little bit. And so basically what happens when you run an incandescent light bulb using an alternating current electrical source like wired electricity, you get a filament that cools down and heats up just a little bit. And so it goes like this. Instead of pulsing light like an LED, 100% on to 0% off 120 times a second, the incandescent light bulb source, the tungsten filament that's really hot, just cools down a little bit and then it heats back up. So it goes woo.
But it continues
woo,
to
woo.
incandesce. Is that the correct verb?
It's still, it still incandesces. Yeah, it continues to incandesce. But it doesn't have a chance to cool all the way down and go and then heat all the way up. It basically stays hot because the pulse is so fast. And so instead of it flickering like this, a incandescent bulb flickers like this. So the percentage, the degree of the flicker is very much reduced. And
could you say how much it's reduced? Like, is there a number ballpark, like from a percent flicker?
You can you can watch it on my Instagram live on SaunaSpace's Instagram. I've measured, I have a really fancy spectrometer that measures flickering light. Well, let me continue. Let me finish. Like, yeah, please, not all incandescent bulbs are the same. So low wattage incandescent bulbs flicker more because of smaller filament. So if you have a 25 watt, or people love those outdoor like sexy moody hanging lights, they're like 11 watts, they're little tiny, and people love those new sort of vintage antique incandescent bulbs that they're 10 watt, 15 watt, 20 watt, 25 watt, even 50 watt, even 60 watt. All of those have a smaller filament that produces less wattage, less light emission overall. The amount of light is produced is much lower, and it's measured by watts. So all of those flicker more severely. The larger wattage you get, the more the flicker is reduced, because you have a bigger, more powerful, more stable filament that the bigger it is, has less ability to cool down with the alternating current light source, where it's losing it's getting the pulsing. So in comparison, but in comparing a 25-watt incandescent home light bulb, like you use at home, like in your nightstand, comparing that to this monster Goliath 250-watt light bulb, the amount of flicker in this is virtually nil. Like when you measure it with a flicker meter, you almost can't measure anything. It's vanishingly small. Whereas if you use a flicker meter and measure the flicker from a 25-watt incandescent light bulb, it's actually pretty significant. It's less than an LED, but it's significant enough that it's non-ideal. And that's why after dark, people say, oh, well, LEDs versus incandescents, what's better, what's more healthy for home lighting? During the day, regular incandescent light bulbs are fine. Low wattage ones is what I mean. After dark, though, you want a fireplace, man. You want something that doesn't flicker. That's why this is really optimal nocturnal lighting, is having like the photon, basically, this huge high wattage incandescent light bulb. The higher wattage, the less flicker. So the ideal, most biologically, most human friendly incandescent bulb is the high wattage bulb that's also red glass, because especially after dark, we don't want blue light. If you think about how long we've had fire as humans, 30,000 years or more, we've had this relationship with creating our own fire, our own incandescence. And what is a form of that? That's always, okay, you have a torch maybe, but the vast majority of the time it was the fire, right? The campfire. I'm going way back thousands of years.
I'll say to your point, like the first hominids to ever develop fire, I believe, was Homo habilis. I could be wrong on that, but it's one of the early hominids, even pre-humans. The first case is not widespread societally, but like that was 2 million years ago. So you can make a case like humans have been domesticating fire for, like, to your point, I mean, just to strengthen the argument,
yeah, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years. I thought it was less of that, but I
may be wrong, but the first ever use of fire was definitely further back, like pre-Homo sapiens. There was pre-humans, hominids who used fire.
Yeah, now, that's a great point.
Widespread use, I can't speak to the exact number. Like widespread societal adoption, maybe it was 30,000 years.
The point is, it was so long ago that we've actually had time to evolve to it. And so what have we evolved to love as humans in terms of light and man-made light is the campfire. And the campfire is this spectrum, man. It's not the spectrum of the sun that has a lot more blue light and ultraviolet. It's the infrared centric, the near infrared centric spectrum. And that light was a campfire down low, and typically, maybe in the daytime, but particularly after dark. And so this light very much tries, we're trying to emulate that concept of light, not overhead light in our home, from lighting above. We want the lighting to the side of us and down below us. And we want the spectrum to be near infrared centric. And that's why if you look on, go to Sauna.space and you go to the learn section, you can see the spectrum of the sun and the spectrum of the thermal light bulb that I've developed, and how I've made it near infrared centric, because I'm trying to mimic that experience with the campfire, which is what we have after dark. And all that, it's kind of devil in the details, but you got to think about all these things, like, you got to think about flicker, the light spectrum, the blue light, the spectrum itself, the nature of the light and the emission of the light, and all the way down to the EMFs, to make sure that the technology is as human centric as possible. And so that recreates that naturalistic, it's bringing that naturalism back indoors into this weird synthetic indoor environment that we've created only in the last 100 years. It's totally bizarre. We're not biologically programmed to handle it at all. But instead of, like, if we can't go out there because we got to work in front of these screens to survive, a lot of us, indoors most of the time, what can we do to recreate that ancestral experience and bring that naturalism inside? And so all of that thought, and many years now, I went into the development of this product, the photon, from the top down, including the EMF stuff. There's two things I wanted to address. One was you asked me before about, like, I made this boastful comment, like that near infrared light is the most efficient wavelength to heat biological tissue. And that's why farmers have used it to heat livestock for 120 years. It's not far infrared wavelengths, and it's not blue light, and it's really not red light. It's near infrared light, particularly light at 1,000 to 1,500 nanometers. That is the most deeply penetrating into the human body. So you're familiar with Dr. Michael Hamblin. You can read Mechanisms of Low-Level Light Therapy or read Fender Foe. There's lots of things online. There's this concept of the optical window of the human body, right? Not all wavelengths of light penetrate biological tissue, and I'm talking about animal tissue. Not all wavelengths penetrate the same due to melanin and hemoglobin. Blue light and ultraviolet light doesn't penetrate our body very well. Melanin and hemoglobin absorb light very strongly in the ultraviolet and the blue, and then they dip down and don't absorb well beyond the middle of the visible light spectrum. And they stop definitely before red. And then on the other side, the primary light absorber, the chromophore, the light absorber in the body, is water. Water begins to absorb light. The first overtone of water is 980 nanometers at near infrared, and then it goes up from there. But in that 1,000 to 1,500 nanometer range, light is only partially absorbed by water. Once you get past 1,500 nanometers into mid-infrared and far infrared wavelengths, you have 100% absorption of light by water. And these are protective mechanisms in the body. So what's in between those two like mountains? There's a valley there called the optical window of the human body. And guess what it is? 600 to about 1,200 nanometers, more or less. It just so happens it's the same. It's not a coincidence, I don't think. It's the same.
I want to get onto that. Yeah.
That's basically the same photobiomodulation. That's the photobiomodulation range. The wavelengths that stimulate mitochondrial response are 600 to 1,000 nanometers, exactly the same wavelengths. And then look at the sun, look at what's called the solar spectrum. So the emission from the sun that actually goes through the atmosphere and the clouds that reaches the earth. Clouds are majority made of water. So they all block far infrared light. So we're only 1 or 2% of the light we get from the sun is far infrared. Again, what's the big whopper right in the middle? It's near infrared. What you got in your face right now, 40% of that is near infrared. Same wavelength. That's the biggest piece of the pie we get from the sun, is the same wavelength range that stimulates mitochondrial response in every cell of our body. It has mitochondria basically, and also heats us more efficiently than any other wavelength. And also, we didn't even talk about water structuring and all that, which we probably don't have time for. But the point is, if we want to heat biological tissue, the most efficient way to do it, photon per photon, is to be focusing on near infrared. And so with this wavelength, near infrared, this wavelength band, and this focus on near infrared in the use of a sauna, for example, we can heat biological tissue much more rapidly and safely and effectively based on our biology, based on our ancestry, and at a lower ambient air temperature, because we're not really using the air around us to heat us up. Like a traditional sauna is heating you from the outside in. Make a huge hot box, get the hair hot, and heat you from the outside in. Far infrared wavelengths, by the way, are doing the same thing. So your far infrared saunas out there, they're using this low energy, long wavelength infrared called far infrared, because it's 100% absorbed by water, is essentially an outside to in heating. It's only near infrared that can heat you from within, like the sun. And so yet, even though it's a lower ambient air temperature, the Sauna Space sauna, the incandescent sauna, it heats you up and produces a sweat response and a 3-degree temperature increase. And the goal and benefit of a sauna in half the time, in 20 minutes and 30 minutes. If you sit in a regular sauna, even a classical Finnish sauna or steam sauna, typically you need to sit in there for 40 minutes to an hour to get this 3-degree temperature increase in the core and get this passive sweating and this purification going on. And in a Sauna Space sauna, using near infrared centric light and technology to heat the body, the air temperature is lower and more gentle, yet the sweating is faster, more efficient, a more efficient sauna session. And then layering in on top all this light therapy, photobiomodulation stuff, it makes for a better mousetrap,
It's an amazing mousetrap. And seriously, like, to all the points of the Sauna Space sauna. So I've been such a nomad. I don't have a Sauna Space actual sauna yet, but I'm going to get one for sure very shortly. Even for the 2 or 3 months I'm in my place in out west. But so then there's the photon that I use, which is such a beautiful healing source of light at night. Like it really blew me away so much when I started using the photon. How, and thank you for making it, Brian. Really, it just completely actually changed my experience. Like I was so craving for bonfires, because I knew about light, I knew how it affects us. And then when I felt how great a fire made me feel, I just craved it. When I was in high school, when I was 17 years old as a senior, I built a bonfire pit in my backyard with bricks like spaced out in a circle raising up, and then like a center part raising up the wood that I would put in the middle, so that the fire was like almost, if I sit in a chair, it was like just, level with my groin and my torso almost. And I just would sit there. And I remember days in the winter in the snow, I would sit around my fire in my backyard, small backyard in the suburbs, but fire pit, and the snow would be on my back and the infrared from the fire on my front. It was so amazing. And I craved that, but traveling, it was hard to find, like, where am I going to make a bonfire? As soon as I felt the photon, it was even better than fire, in my opinion, because it's consistent. So fire, it's like you're going to get burned 1 second and then you're too cold, and it's like all the back and forth.
It's a lot of work too.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And the photon, you're just like, oh my gosh, could it get any better? Like, honestly, it is such an amazing, like, it really feels like the sun I'm sitting in right now. It's extremely comparable. Obviously, it doesn't have the full spectrum, the blue, the green, the other stuff during the day. Maybe you guys could even, if you eventually wanted to, you could do like a daylight version that doesn't have the red glass. I don't know if that's in the cards, but for nighttime and daytime, the photon is beyond healing. And most people already have so much blue light that from the devices, we probably don't need. Maybe we don't need the extra blue. I just want to make,
that's part of the problem, man, is that nowadays, sun is better than anything. All right. Don't get me wrong here. Like the sun, but who has
Amen.
that lifestyle anymore where they're both getting proper sunlight during the day and avoiding all of this artificial junk blue light that we have everywhere? It's like it's an impossibility.
Yeah,
we have way too much blue. People need, to both minimize the amount of overexposure of blue they're getting from all these high energy blue only light sources, but also they need to reintroduce this near infrared into the equation. And how do you do that effectively for people who are just indoors all day, every day? And so I think this is the next best thing for someone who can't live that ancestral lifestyle.
I agree. I would fully agree. So I want to make one more point, and then kind of ask you a sort of summarizing or a sort of wrapping up question. But you mentioned earlier on, and it's been kind of a theme, that incandescent light sources have been generally, banned. They've been shunned and so forth by modern society because of this supposed energy wasting. And as I mentioned, I just was at a Bitcoin conference in Miami, the world's largest Bitcoin conference, like almost 30,000 attendees. It's huge. And side note, but Bitcoin's beautiful because it's a decentralized form of money that allows people to it's orthogonal to the law, meaning that the law cannot control or say anything about Bitcoin effectively. And it allows people to take back some of that freedom, where the regulators want to control everyone in the financial world. Obviously, they do, by printing more money and devaluing all of our currency and all of our hard work and savings, which happens in extreme cases. But anyway, huge controversy that they're trying to use to regulate Bitcoin is the idea that proof of work mining, which is the system on which Bitcoin is based, is not energy efficient. It's a waste of energy. And you probably hear that all over the news. That's the number one from the ESG folks. Yeah, the environmental social governance type folks, like the climate changers and the world's ending folks. That proof of work mining and Bitcoin mining Bitcoin's horrible because it's a waste of energy. Now, the interesting thing about Bitcoin is, yes, to verify transactions through what they call proof of work mining, the way it works, to put it simply, is that instead of having every transaction, say you and I wanted to send money to each other, the easiest, most efficient way from an energy perspective would be to have a trusted centralized authority like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Wells Fargo, you name it, Bank of America, any of these banks. They record the transactions in their centralized database. So they can say, okay, Matt debited this much from his account and Brian was credited this much, et cetera, et cetera, when I go to buy my Sauna Space sauna. And, even if you give me a discount, we got to have a transaction going on there. So they're going to set that in their record. Now, that's if you trust a centralized authority to keep a record of all your transactions, which all of history has shown that we should not trust banks because they're lending out the money 10 times to one, typically, or 7 times to one what they have. So and they're printing more money. So it's not a good system, the central banks. So to have a trustless decentralized form of digital cash, which is what Bitcoin is peer-to-peer. So me to you, the most efficient way that has been discovered to date, and it's been 10 years, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have spent millions of dollars, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars on other sort of technologies inspired by the innovation of Bitcoin. Not one person has found a more efficient way to have a trustless digital peer-to-peer digital cash, like meaning transactions are final. No one can charge you back. Once the transaction's done, it's done, which is why if your Bitcoin's stolen, it's gone. No one can, just like if you lost a brick of gold on the street and someone grabbed it, it's gone. Cash on the street, it's gone. No one can give it back to you. It's digital cash. And the most efficient way to do that is with trustless is the key, not through a third party, is to have every single member of the network, what's called nodes, some of which are just nodes that record all transactions, some of which are called miners, which are nodes that actually commit transactions to the ledger, which is called the blockchain. And they use electricity. So this is where the energy stuff comes in. They use electricity and processing power to basically solve mathematical equations that are difficult to solve and require processing power, but are easy to verify. So it takes, say, 100 units of energy to solve it, but only a tenth of 1 unit of energy to verify that that transaction or that solution is correct. And so that's why and so the cost and energy cost of having that data of a transaction, and obviously it's hundreds of thousands of transactions in general, but distributed on every single device so that all of them are recorded, is more energy using than if you just had one copy of a transaction in Visa's database. You see what I'm saying? Like if we have your and my transaction on every single network member recorded so that there's a common ledger, it's going to take more energy because it's, instead of one centralized database, it's on literally hundreds of thousands or millions of computers around the world. So it uses way more energy, but it is still the most energy efficient way to have basically a non-authoritarian controlled currency. And the reason I bring that up is because it's an awfully similar comparison to incandescent lighting. Like, even though, yes, it uses more energy than an LED, like what's the goal? Well, if the goal is to have a light source that produces a healthy spectrum that doesn't flicker like crazy, that is healthy for the body and comparable to sunlight to the extent possible, there is no better solution to date than an incandescent bulb. If you want to compromise health and LEDs and fluorescence with LEDs and fluorescence, okay, you can do that, but that's not the goal. If we're talking a healthy lighting, 100 years have passed, no one's developed yet. I'd like to, contribute to maybe something in a lower energy using form than the incandescent. So it is what it is. So like, we should just stop, I think, wasting time and energy about it. And people who want to follow that narrative, they can follow that narrative. But the people who want the health and the full spectrum, they should get the Sauna Space or use, incandescent lighting where possible, if legal. So anyway, that's just my rant on proof of work mining.
It's sort of there's an elegant analogy there. When in your description you just made of Bitcoin, of the economics of it, it just reminds me of, in general, the description of the intelligence of the market and the free market economics.
Amen. That's exactly what it is.
Where one would think, oh, if we don't have centralized regulation, all these people just, it would be insane. They're making their own decisions in the market and buying and selling things. It turns out that you have a greater economy of that. There's a greater efficiency and utilization of resources in it, there not being a centralized top-down control of all of the economy, all the transactions that people engage in. That's like the biggest argument behind free market economics. And so I think that was really, really elegant. It just reminds me of my final point here, which I think is echoing what you're saying, is that energy efficiency is not the only criterion. Okay, that's not the only thing that matters. Just like with humans, the pure efficiency of the market and the utilization of resources is not the only thing that matters in regards to the formula of our existence. There are other contributing factors, and one of the most important things, I think, is choice. The freedom to choose. If I want LEDs at home, great. If I want some LEDs over here in my garage for technical lighting, and I want incandescence in my bedroom for healthy human-centric lighting, let me choose that. Let me have that. If I want if I want to keep my money as gold and I want to have a few Benjamins over here, and then I want to have some Bitcoin on the side, let the people choose, let the people decide. If people, and that's sort of the trend that we hope to encourage in health and wellness, really, is just to allow people to choose. With the whole pandemic era that seems to still not be over, there was a big shift back to reduction in health choices. It's if you're interested in pharmaceutical solutions, they're there for you. But for people who are not interested in that and may just want to sit in the sun for to boost their immunity, let them do that. Let the people let people decide for themselves what's best for them, whether it's health and wellness, or it's their finances and how they want to save and expend their assets, or really in anything. It's a matter of choice, and that's where this whether it's light bulbs or cryptocurrency or health and wellness, it's all a matter of choice and freedom being more important than efficiency and safety.
Amen. I'm with you on that. Now, how are you on time? I have one more question that I'd like to ask, maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, sure. I got a little bit more time. Go ahead.
Awesome. So this is the one subject that, and I like to wrap up with this because it's the subject that when we were walking on the beach talking the first time we met, and you were just super uber passionate as you are, and I really admire. Whenever I think of you, I admire your passion, your drive, your working man energy that you just get after it every day. Like, it is super inspiring for me as a young businessman. And also you and Brian gave me a ton of valuable advice, which, by the way, a year later has paid huge dividends when I was experiencing some challenges in my business last year, and things are going amazing. So thank you very much, guys. Brian is an amazing businessman as well, and very conscious and everything. But and Sauna Space is a manifestation of that I see in this world. So this question is, it's about, I'm just going to get straight to it. Like the Juve panels, all LED light therapy panels. We've touched a lot on the benefits of incandescence, right? But I think a practical takeaway for a lot of listeners is going to be, all right, well, what about the LED panels? What about the ones that even there's new ones that offer 5 or 6 different wavelengths of LED light, but they don't have the near infrared. How would you explain the difference between an LED photobiomodulation light therapy panel that can deliver high intensities of very specific wavelength bands compared to a device like the Sauna Space that is offering a different spectrum, a much broader spectrum, of course, with lower, what some might say are not strong enough intensities of the specific hot photobiomodulation active wavelengths compared to one of these other more isolated panels? But yet, how would you compare and contrast those?
Very simply, Sauna Space is the orange, and the LED light. Very simply speaking, the contrast is that Sauna Space is an orange. The orange, the thing you eat every day to sustain you, the thing you enjoy actually eating. And the LED light therapy panel is synthetic vitamin C powder. Can be very effective, and it is effective. There's this thing called the Versa laser or something. It's a cold 832 nanometer laser that it's a very expensive laser device that chiropractors have in their offices, and it's very effective in alleviating acute chronic joint pain and many other things as well. It's a very effective tool, and so is so are some of these LED light therapy products. That's why you see a greater and greater mainstream acceptance of light therapy as an effective therapeutic modality. And you can fly a plane, and in Sky Mall you see those hats, and they have red LEDs and basically a baseball cap, and you just wear that for treating alopecia and so on and so forth. So the difference is, number one, these high powered things, you use those for sort of maybe acute issues here and there, but they're not something you can use all day long, and they're not something that really sustains you. And you can literally use every day, all day long. This photon, for example, you can use it for the traditional use as targeted spot therapy in a naked flesh, for a 10 to 20 to 40 minute session, and you can repeat that 5 or 10 times a day. But it's also being used for indoor environmental light therapy to correct these synthetic environments. So I have this photon on. It's not just a conversation piece for our conversation here. I actually have it on all day long because it's canceling out the flickering light effect from the screens, and the blue light emission is actually canceled out by this light. And I've shown that on my Instagram. You can see that with the light meter. So we're correcting the light environment. This has a passive therapeutic use that you can literally use all day long. After dark, what's your light source? It's not an LED light therapy panel, certainly, but you can use this. So the value you get out of this is really, I think, so much more because of how much you get in your life. And really, these products are complementary. There's no reason why you can't own a photon and also own an LED light therapy device. But that's like the simple analogy. A couple other things I would bring into
Really
this.
well put. Really well put.
A couple other things I would bring in, just food for thought. So if you read Friend or Foe, it's an article. Hamblin is one of the authors on it. There's a discussion in there: is photobiomodulation good or bad for us? Because there's some studies that seem to indicate, wow, in some ways, this near infrared or red wavelengths cause adverse effects in the cells, but in many of these studies, it causes beneficial effects. So what is it? Is it a friend or is it a foe? And if you look at all of those studies, you see that if there's too much power, then it causes damage. If there's not enough power, it doesn't do anything. It's not biologically relevant. And so it's like, well, what's that sweet spot? The sweet spot is what we're, again, biologically programmed to get after millions of years of evolution, billions, really, if we're talking from a mitochondrial perspective. And so what is the wattage of near infrared light you get from the sun? So this has also been calculated. So on a cloudy day at the equator, you get between, in terms of near infrared light, you get between like 20 to 60 to 70 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So from 20 to, let's call it 40 or 50 milliwatts per centimeter squared when there's no clouds and everything's perfect. So if you look at the literature into photobiomodulation studies, which are primarily conducted with LEDs, you see that therapeutic photobiomodulation is defined as between 10 and 100 milliwatts per centimeter squared. And you want the higher energy, you want to get up to 100 milliwatts per squared if you're trying to go through bone tissue. So you can see it on my website. You can see it also on Instagram. If you look at what is the photobiomodulation wavelength wattage you get from this thermalite bulb and, the SaunaSpace products in general. And it's between it's basically between 50 and 80 milliwatts per centimeter squared. If you're talking about the recommended use distance and the dosage over time. So what SaunaSpace delivers is very much at the ancestral level of the amount of photobiomodulation wattage you would get, the wattage of near infrared wavelengths that stimulate these responses in the dosage that you would get being outside. And then furthermore, what's really interesting in that Friend or Foe article is that's a summarizing article of a lot of studies. And one thing that's noted in there is that you can get photobiomodulation responses from 0.1 milliwatt per centimeter squared. So think about when you're sitting in front of the campfire. It's, again, not just the heat that's stimulating you. It's definitely the light therapy stimulating you. It's a very small amount that creates that and requires that stimulation. So you definitely, we've shown that empirically, that you get biologically relevant, very much in the middle, solidly in the middle of the scientifically defined therapeutic photobiomodulation range, 50 milliwatts per centimeter squared or more. And then the other thing is that even if you don't have much, even if you do it lightly, like if you use your photon, for example, for 5 minutes, just a really brief period of time behind the head right before sleeping, or for many other applications, you'll find that you do have a response and you do feel better. And I guess the final thing is this is something to be concerned with in the world of LED light therapy in general, not just LED light therapy versus incandescent light therapy. And that's the difference between red and near infrared. So not a lot of people appreciate this. Remember I said before, the most effective, most deeply penetrating wavelengths are actually in the near infrared. It's actually at about 830 nanometers or so. Near infrared penetrates much deeper than red. So if we're talking about, if we want to do photobiomodulation, light therapy to our brain tissue, our nerves, and cause regeneration there and cause healing in that brain. If we have TBI, if we have other neuropsychiatric symptoms, red light doesn't do anything because the red light is 100% blocked by the skull tissue. If you want to photobiomodulate the deepest, most neither regions of the body, you want to be using near infrared in general. So if you're looking at an LED light therapy panel, you better be getting a near infrared one, because the near infrared one is the one that is the one that uniquely accesses those deep tissues.
Amazing. This is fascinating for me. I really appreciate it, Brian. This has been very insightful. For me, it's a ton of reminders about things I've maybe learned before and new ideas about things I haven't thought about before. I would just like to put, out an opportunity for you to share where people can find you, your personally, and your website, your company, anything you'd like to share with the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Everything's on sauna.space. That's our website. And you can get to, from there, you can get to our blog.sauna.space. That's where I've written some really long-winded kind of in the weeds articles for people who like the literature. But on sauna.space, you can learn not just about the products and the science. If you go to the footer and click on our research archive, I've curated the literature that's related to sauna therapy and to light therapy. And I've organized it by topic. So you can click on like skin or stress or sleep, and you can get right to the published literature of the articles that are relevant in light therapy and heat therapy, related to the topic that you care about. So those of you that like to dive into the white papers, go to sauna.space, go to the research archive at the bottom. And yeah, you can learn about the product there. It's free shipping, and you get 100 days to try it out here in the United States and Canada. So I frankly want to make sure you really like it. You get a long time to try it out. And that's the also another unique thing that maybe I didn't mention before about SaunaSpace's light therapy is that there's a reason we call ourselves SaunaSpace. It is a sauna. So you're doing light therapy and heat therapy together. This concept of we've been focused on light, man. You're the light guy, and it's a light diet world, right? And it's all about light diet right now. But there's this whole intriguing world of sauna for health benefit that is fascinating. We could talk a whole nother 2 hours on that. It's a very essential tool that we all really ought to have in our toolbox. And so why not do those two things at once? SaunaSpace is really the only technology that's offering that.
Amen. Well, you know what? Let's put an interview on the books, even if it's a couple months out. We can do that afterwards. But so anyone listening, you can also, check out this episode, share it with your friends, and then check back in a couple months. I'm sure you'll be very excited to hear an interview specifically on the benefits of sauna, of heat. And as always, so this episode, the Light Diet podcast in general, is made possible through you guys supporting Raw Optics, as well as going out and supporting people who we like to work with closely, like Brian at Sauna Space. And I believe we have, I'll put this in the show notes, but I believe there's a discount code. I believe it's the Light Diet that people can use on your site to get some discount. I don't know if it's 5 or 10%, something like that, but that can be really great for anyone who's interested. But no matter what, and if you're interested in going all in, you want to get the big EMF blocking, several $1,000 device, it is well worth your investment. I can say personally, because I've utilized the device of several friends of mine, even though I don't have one. And these friends, by the way, these aren't just like your regular Joe off the street, although many are, but several of the people who I know personally who are, loyal customers of Brian's are, some of the leading music producers of the last 30 years, basically of this whole decade, and leading tech executives who have started some of the biggest Silicon Valley companies, and they're all using SaunaSpace because it's such a powerful product. So Brian, thank you so much. Hang on here and I'll just stop the recording. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in, and have a phenomenal day. Get out and remember, you are the light of the world. Take care.
Thanks, man.